Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, when I first heard about the Hillcrest Hotel, a place deep in the mountains, more than 100 miles from the city, I didn't think I would be haunted by it to this extent. Locals say there is a room in that hotel, room 217, where no one can stay overnight. They say that anyone who has tried it leaves in fear, trembling, and some even disappear without a trace. I am a journalist who specializes in writing about strange phenomena and decided to go to Hillcrest to verify the story. When my car turned onto the road leading to the hotel, the skies seemed to collapse. The fog was so thick that I could not see the front of the car clearly. An old wooden sign appeared with the faded words Hillcrest Hotel since 1912. The main door creaked when I pushed it open, and the smell of mold and rotting wood hit my nose. The manager was named Thomas, a thin man, his face pale as if he had not slept for a long time. When I mentioned room 217, his eyes immediately changed. He was silent for a few seconds and then asked me if I really wanted to stay there. I nodded. He only said one sentence: "Don't open the closet door in the corner." No matter what you hear, room 217 was at the end of the third-floor hallway, where the lights were flickering as if they were about to go out. When I put my hand on the doorknob, a cold air rushed through, giving me goosebumps. The door opened, revealing a classic room with faded floral wallpaper, a large bed covered with a white blanket, and a window overlooking the dark forest. I turned on the desk lamp, but the dim light was not enough to dispel the darkness. In the corner of the room was an ancient wooden closet with peeling paint and a tarnished brass handle. I remembered Thomas's words, so I deliberately ignored it. I turned on the recorder and began to record every detail, every sound. The first night, around midnight, I heard footsteps. It wasn't the sound of someone walking on the wooden floor, but a soft sound like someone shuffling their feet. I opened the door and looked down the hallway, but there was no one. When I returned to the room, the wooden cabinet door shook slightly, even though there was no wind. I approached it, placing my hand on the cold surface. A small sound like breathing came from inside, making me step back. I tried to calm down, telling myself that it was just an illusion caused by fatigue. I lay down on the bed, closed my eyes, but the cold air from somewhere made me shiver. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the window was wide open. The curtains were swaying, even though there was no wind. Around 3 in the morning, I was suddenly awakened by the sound of crying. A woman's cry echoed from the wooden cabinet. It was soft, choked, as if filled with despair. I turned on the light, my heart pounding. The room was completely silent, only the yellow light shining on the cabinet's surface. I stood up, trembling as I approached. When I reached out to touch the cabinet handle, suddenly there was a 3-time knock from inside. I was startled and fell back on the floor. The crying stopped. I ran to the hallway, but all the other doors were closed. I wanted to go down to the reception desk, but the stairs seemed to stretch on forever. I couldn't get there. When I turned back, I saw a mud handprint on the door of room 217, as if someone had just touched it from the inside. I was so scared that I sat down on the floor, my mind blank. When dawn came, everything seemed to return to normal. Thomas found me sitting in the hallway, my eyes dark. He didn't ask much, just told me to leave. But my curious nature made me stay another night. I wanted to know the truth behind that closet door the second night. I placed the camera and microphone in front of the closet, hoping to record something. Around midnight, the lights flickered again. A shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the bed, the figure of a woman in a white dress, her long hair covering her face. I froze, unable to move. She turned to face me, but there was no face, just a dark void. A whisper echoed in my ear, "Don't be here anymore." I closed my eyes tightly. My heart felt like it was about to explode. When I opened my eyes, she was gone, but the closet door was ajar, empty inside. I ran out of the room, leaving my luggage and camera behind. The next morning, Thomas said he had seen that image for the past 20 years. Ever since his wife died in this very room 217, I left Hillcrest with the feeling that my soul was still trapped there. Every night, I still heard the crying in my head. Perhaps no one could stay in that room for more than a night, because it no longer belonged to this world. A place where the boundary between the living and the soul had been erased, leaving only chilling scares that lasted forever. I left the Hillcrest Hotel in a state of half-consciousness, my mind reeling from lack of sleep and panic. As the car left the winding road down the mountain, I still felt like someone was watching me from behind. I turned around several times, only to see the trees shrouded in white mist. But in the rearview mirror, I briefly saw a blurry figure standing right at the third-floor window, in room 217. The figure did not move, just stood there, watching me walk away. I told myself that it was just an illusion, that my mind had been made paranoid by those terrible nights. But the following nights, that crying appeared again. No longer in the wooden cabinet of Hillcrest, but right in my apartment. At first it was just a small murmur like a draft. Then it gradually became clearer, like a woman's voice softly calling my name. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of the wooden cabinet door opening, and from the darkness, the eyeless eyes staring at me. I began to have insomnia. My body was exhausted, and sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, I felt like someone was standing behind me. I decided to go back to Hillcrest. This time, not out of curiosity, but because I knew I couldn't escape it without understanding the truth. When I arrived, the hotel looked even older than before. Thomas greeted me with a stunned look, as if he didn't believe I was still alive. He told me that after I left, room 217 was locked forever. No one was allowed to enter, but I begged him again to open the door. Finally, he sighed and agreed on the condition that I leave before dawn. When I entered the room, everything was the same as the first time I came. The dusty bed, the frayed curtains, and the wooden chest still stood there in the corner, silent but haunting. I felt a chill around me, as if hundreds of eyes were watching. I took out my tape recorder, turned it on, and asked in the silence, "Who is here with me?" There was no answer, but when I listened to the recording, in the silence, I heard a voice whisper, "Help me." I approached the wooden chest, my heart pounding. I knew I shouldn't open it, but something urged me to do otherwise. My hands trembled as I grasped the cold handle. When the door swung open, a blast of cold air rushed out, and I saw that inside was not clothes or objects, but an old photograph. In the photo, a woman in a white dress stood by the window, her face blank. Behind her, there was a man I recognized immediately. It was Thomas, at least 30 years younger. I turned to him, his eyes filled with horror. He trembled as he told me that the woman was his wife, Mary, who had died in this very room. The police said she had committed suicide, but he knew that wasn't true. I asked Thomas to tell me everything. He said that on a rainy night many years ago, Mary had disappeared from her room while the door was still locked from the inside. The next morning, they found her lying in the wooden cabinet, her eyes wide open, her face distorted with fear. Since then, anyone who had stayed in room 217 had heard her crying, or seen a white shadow moving around the cabinet. Thomas said, in despair, that his wife's spirit was trapped there because he had hidden something that he would never tell. When I finished listening, I felt a chill rise in my heart. I asked him what the secret was, but he only said I deserved to be punished. Then he left the room, leaving me alone in the darkness. The wind outside began to pick up, the windows rattling. I sat by the cupboard, listening. The crying rang out again, this time clearer than ever. I heard Mary's voice, but with it came a soft laugh, light as the wind but making my spine tingle. I said loudly that I wanted to help her out, that I wasn't afraid. Suddenly, the lights went out, darkness engulfed everything. The cupboard door swung open. From inside came a white smoke billowing out, forming the shape of a woman in a white dress. She walked towards me, not walking but floating, her eyes deep black. She reached out to touch my shoulder, cold as ice. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt choked. Then she whispered, "He killed me." Immediately after, a strong wind blew, causing everything to collapse, and her figure vanished into thin air. I ran out of the room, rushing down the stairs. But when I reached the reception desk, Thomas had disappeared. Only the old photo lay on the table, with the scrawled words on the back of it, "Never come back." I left Hillcrest for the second time, carrying with me an unnamed fear. But deep in my mind, I knew this story was not over, because every night I still hear Mary's voice calling my name, echoing through the horror stories of the darkness. I don't remember how I got home. The second time I left Hillcrest, it felt like I had just woken up from a long dream, but everything around me was no longer normal. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and always had the feeling of being watched. At first, it was just the sound of the wind whistling outside the window, the sound of the wooden floor creaking in the middle of the night, but then everything became clearer. Every time I entered the bedroom, the air became unusually cold, and Mary's face flashed in the mirror like a shadow. I knew she hadn't let me go yet. One morning, when I pulled under the bed to clean, something fell out. It was an old, yellowed, dusty envelope. The words Hillcrest Hotel were printed on it, along with a cracked red wax seal. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a letter written in black ink, the handwriting shaky and desperate. The first line read, "If anyone reads this, please rest my soul in peace." Below it was Mary's name, and the date that matched the night she died. I read on and realized this was no ordinary last wish, but an accusation. Mary wrote that she had discovered that her husband, Thomas, had hidden a dark secret in room 217, something that had frightened her so much that she had to hide in a wooden cabinet. She insisted that there was something in the cabinet that did not belong in this world, and that Thomas had opened something that should never have been touched. I sat there for hours, still holding the letter. How could it have appeared in my house, hundreds of miles from Hillcrest? Who had put it there, and more importantly, why? I returned to the living room, feeling the space shrink, the light dim. Suddenly, a whisper right next to my ear, "Don't trust him." I spun around, and there was no one there, only the mirror reflecting my pale face. But behind my shoulder, in the mirror, there was the silhouette of a woman in a white dress, her head slightly bowed, her long hair covering her face. When I turned back, the room was empty. I decided to call the local police, reporting that I had found a letter that might be related to the old death in Hillcrest. But when I opened the envelope again to take a picture, the letter was gone. Inside the envelope was now only a blank sheet of paper. I was stunned, unable to believe my eyes. A chill ran down my spine when I heard the bedroom door slam shut. That night, I lay on the sofa in the living room, not daring to sleep in the room. Around 2 a.m, I heard someone walking in the hallway. Light, steady footsteps, then stopped right in front of the door. The door slowly opened, and in the darkness, empty eyes looked at me through the crack. I got up, turned on all the lights, but there was no one. There was only a piece of paper on the floor, scrawled "Return to room 217 if you want to know the truth." I knew I couldn't hide forever. The next morning, I returned to Hillcrest again, but this time the hotel was different. The main door was locked, the curtains were covered in dust, and the sign was falling off. I knocked several times before a strange man appeared, saying that the hotel had been closed for 2 years after the fire. I told him I knew Thomas, and he laughed coldly and said that Thomas had died in room 217 last year. The police said he had burned himself to death. But when they found his body, the wooden cabinet was still intact, and on the wall was written in blood, "I'm sorry." Mary, the story was getting crazier and crazier. I stood frozen in the ruined hallway, looking towards the door of room 217. Though scorched, the door was still closed, as if time had not touched it. I stepped closer, put my hand on the handle. It felt cold, like frozen metal. I pushed the door open. It opened easily, without a sound. It was dark inside. The smell of smoke and ashes still lingered. There were pieces of burnt wood on the floor, but the wooden cabinet still stood tall, undamaged. I moved closer, my heart pounding. When I touched the handle, a sigh rang in my ears. "You're back." I stepped back, but the white figure from the cabinet stepped out. Mary stood there, her black eyes empty, her face still filled with endless pain. She looked at me, her voice like the wind blowing through a cemetery. "Thomas brought something from another world here, and I am the one who must suffer the consequences." I asked her what it was, but instead of answering, she pointed to the wooden cabinet, where suddenly there was a 3-time knock, just like the first night I came. The door was slightly open, and inside was a deep, dark space, so deep that the light could not reach. I understood that the secret of Hillcrest was not just a family tragedy, but a door that opened to another world. I left the room in a panic, knowing that if I stayed another minute, I might never come out again. But deep down, I felt that everything was not over yet, because every night I heard a whisper calling my name from somewhere far away, but also very close, as if echoing from the world of ghost stories that humans should never explore. After that night, I could not rest easy even after leaving Hillcrest. The 3-beat knock and the image of Mary standing in front of the wooden cabinet still echoed in my mind. I wondered what was behind that door, what Thomas had tried to hide for so many years. I could not shake the feeling that something was waiting for me on the other side, something that had dragged Mary's soul into that dark place. For many nights, I dreamed that I was standing in front of the cabinet. Inside there was not only darkness, but also another door, slightly opened, emitting a cold blue light. In my dreams, I always heard Mary's voice saying, "You can't go in, they're waiting." One morning, I woke up and found a strange object on my desk. It was an old brass key, engraved with the number 217. I don't remember when I brought it home, My hand trembled as I held it. The metal felt cold as ice, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew it called me back. Despite my fear, I felt like I had no choice. When I arrived at Hillcrest, the sun was about to set, the pale red light of the afternoon making the building look like a giant corpse. I walked through the rusted gate, the grass growing wildly, blocking the path. Inside the hotel was dark, no one could hear, only the wind whistling through the cracks in the doors. I went straight to the third floor, each heavy step echoing in the empty space. When I reached room 217, I stopped, took a deep breath, and inserted the key into the lock. The dry, metallic sound rang out, and then the door opened, dust-free, as if the room had always been watched over by someone. Everything was the same as before, the bed, the table lamp, and the wooden cabinets still standing there, towering in the darkness. I turned on the light, the pale light shining on the cabinet, and I saw a thin, long crack appear on the door, like a slash. I approached, put my hand on it, and felt the cold go straight to my bones. Suddenly, the crack emitted a dim light, then slowly widened, revealing a small gap like a second door inside the cupboard. I looked inside. Inside was no longer an empty space, but a dark, deep passage. Cold wind blew out from there, carrying the smell of damp earth and rusty iron. My heart was pounding, each beat echoing in my head. I didn't know what made me step forward, only that if I didn't go in, I would never escape this obsession. I stepped through that crack of light, and immediately everything around me disappeared. I stood in a long hallway, the walls covered with faded floral paper, just like in the room. But there was no light here, only the dim blue light from the tilted hanging lamps. Under my feet, the wooden floor creaked, as if someone was walking in time. At the end of the hallway, I saw Mary's shadow. She no longer had the same pained look as before, but stood quietly, looking towards me, her eyes deep black. I called her name, but she didn't answer. As I approached, she disappeared, leaving only her white dress on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and saw a small photo fall out. In the photo, Thomas was standing next to another man, his face half burned, looking terrifyingly familiar. Under the photo was the words, "Do not open the second door." I felt dizzy, then heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. The hallway was no longer empty. Dozens of blurry figures appeared, all looking at me with lifeless eyes, their faces covered in darkness. They approached, slowly and in unison, the air filled with chaotic whispers. I backed away, trying to find a way out, but the hallway seemed endless. I shouted Mary's name, and from afar her voice rang out faintly, "You can't stay here. Go. They'll hold you back." At that moment, a cold hand touched my shoulder. I turned around and saw Thomas's face, his eyes sunken, his mouth twisted into a crooked smile. "You opened it, now you'll stay in my place." I screamed, but all the sound seemed to be sucked into the void. I fell to the floor. And when I looked up, I was in room 217 again. The wooden cabinet was closed, no cracks left. I didn't know what had just happened. I just felt like my body was being drained of all strength. When I stepped out into the hallway, I heard the sound of wind and faint laughter echoing from inside the cabinet. I looked back one last time, then ran out of Hillcrest, not looking back. But I knew the second door was still there, waiting for someone curious enough to open it. And when they did, this haunted story would begin again. After leaving Hillcrest for the third time, I tried to forget everything. I sold my old apartment, moved to another city, and stayed away from anything related to room 217. But the haunting didn't let me go. Every night when I fell asleep, I found myself standing in the endless hallway, the walls covered in mold, the dim light flickering as if about to go out. At the end of the hallway was an old door with the number 217 slightly open, emitting a dark blue light. I tried to walk, but each time I got closer, the distance grew longer. And from behind that door, a steady 3-beat knock sounded. And then Mary's voice whispered my name. The dreams became more and more real, to the point that I could no longer distinguish between dream and reality. One night, I woke up to the sound of rain falling outside the window. But the sound I heard wasn't the rain, but the sound of water dripping in the living room. I walked out and saw wet footprints stretching from the door to the middle of the floor. There was no one else there but me. When I looked closely, the footprints were pointing towards my bedroom, stopping right next to the bed. I felt a chill on my skin, as if someone had just stood there before I walked out. I decided to install a night vision camera to record everything. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. At first, the scene was empty, only darkness. But around 2 in the morning, a mist appeared in the middle of the living room and gradually took the shape of a woman in a white dress. She walked slowly, step by step, closer to the camera. When she was almost touching the lens, her face was clearly visible. Her eyes were deep, black and empty. Her lips moved slightly, making unclear sounds, but when I turned up the speaker, I clearly heard 3 words: "They're still there." I had no doubt. Hillcrest was still following me. It wasn't just a place, it was a door to another world, where lost souls wandered the dark hallways. I returned to Hillcrest once more, this time intending to record the final evidence to end it all. When I arrived, the hotel was still deserted, but no longer silent. I heard whispers from inside, like hundreds of people talking at once. The main door was ajar, a cold wind blowing out, carrying the smell of mold and smoke. I walked in, the weak light from the flashlight illuminating each scorched wall, the old picture frames hanging crookedly. The 3rd floor was the same, except the hallway seemed longer than before. I turned on the video camera, talking softly as I walked to record everything. My footsteps echoed, but sometimes I heard another, slower sound a few steps away. I stopped, the other sound stopped too. I walked on, the other sound echoed again. I turned back, no one. When I shined my flashlight toward the end of the hallway, door 217 was wide open, a dim blue light spreading across the wooden floor. I stepped inside, finding the wooden cabinet cracked in half. Inside, the 2nd door was now wide open, a white mist pouring out, swirling around my feet. I felt dozens of cold hands touching me, pulling me toward the door. I struggled, but the more I struggled, the stronger the pull. Whispers echoed around me, mixed with crying, laughter, and Thomas's voice, distorted and desperate. In that moment, I saw Mary standing on the other side of the door, looking at me with pained eyes. She shook her head, holding out her hand as if to stop me, but it was too late. A strong force sucked me inside. I woke up in the familiar hallway, but everything was different. The walls were covered in dried blood, the lights flickered, and the door frames no longer had numbers. I ran down the hallway, opening each door, but each room was empty, only the same bed and wooden cabinet. I realized I was trapped in Hillcrest itself, with no way out. The triple knocks sounded again, this time right behind me. When I turned around, Mary stood there, her face no longer gentle, but dark as if something had taken over. Her voice rang out, low and cold. "You opened that door. Now you are also a part of Hillcrest." I ran, but the hallway stretched on forever. Each step I took seemed to be swallowed by the void. Finally, I fell, and before I passed out, I saw door 217 appear again, glowing in the darkness. When I woke up, I was in my apartment. Everything was as if it had never happened. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw behind me a long hallway, flickering lights, and the triple knock echoed. I understood that Hillcrest was not located anywhere in particular. It resides in the minds of those who have opened the second door. And when night falls, that call resounds, reminding me that no one escapes the scary stories told by the breath of the dead. After weeks of trying to forget Hillcrest, I began searching desperately for clues. Part of me wanted to understand why I was still haunted, and part of me felt like something was pulling me back. In my search for old information, I discovered an online account of a man named John Miller, who had been a night watchman at Hillcrest before it closed. He had passed away years ago, but some of his old writings and notes remained. One of them was titled The Last Night's Journal. I opened it and felt like someone was standing behind me as I read each line in the diary. John said that in the last years before Hillcrest closed, the guests dwindled because of the rumors about room 217. He said that many people had quit out of fear, but he stayed because he needed the money and because he was curious about what made that room cursed. One night on duty, he heard footsteps coming from the third floor, even though the hotel was empty. When he went to check, he found the door to room 217 ajar. The lights in the room flickered, and he heard a woman crying. When he looked inside, there was no one. Only the wooden cabinet shook slightly as if someone was knocking from inside. John said that after that day, every night he heard footsteps from the third floor, always stopping right in front of room 217. Once, he tried to set up a video camera to record, but the next morning, the tape was all grainy. When he looked closely among the distorted frames, he saw the silhouette of a woman standing right behind him. From then on, he began to hear whispers calling his name, and sometimes saw a white shadow at the end of the hallway. He wrote that every night when he passed room 217, he felt as if someone was watching him from inside. The last part of the diary made me shiver. John said that one night, around 3 a.m., he was awakened by the reception bell ringing repeatedly. When he ran down to the counter, there was no one. But when he looked at the security screen, he saw himself standing in front of room 217. He checked everywhere, but he was clearly on the ground floor. The image on the screen remained still, head down. Then he looked up, looking straight into the camera. John said that at that moment, the screen went black. All the hotel lights went out, and in the darkness, he heard hundreds of voices whispering at the same time. I sat in front of the computer screen, my heart pounding. I tried to contact John's relatives and found out that he had died in his own house, just a few months after Hillcrest was sealed. Neighbors said they heard someone knocking on the door every night, but when they opened it, there was no one. One even said that they saw a faint blue light coming from inside his house. When the police went to check, they found a final piece of paper on his desk, with only 3 words: "Don't trust Mary." I don't understand why he wrote that. Mary was a victim, a trapped soul, or something else. Ever since I read that sentence, I couldn't rest. I went back to check the old videos I took in Hillcrest. When I slowed down, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. In one frame, right after I walked through the wooden cabinet door. There was another figure following me, tall and thin, moving slowly, face unclear. That figure wasn't Mary, nor Thomas. It was like an incomplete shape, opaque like smoke. The next night, I dreamed of John. He was standing in his night guard uniform, his face pale, his eyes empty. He said only one sentence: Mary was not the last person to die there. I asked who else, but he vanished into white smoke. I woke up, sweating, but on the table appeared an old notebook identical to John's diary. The last page was torn in half. The words "the door won't close anymore" blurred. As I picked up the notebook, I heard footsteps echoing in the hallway of my house, slow and lingering. I turned around, no one there, but on the wall there was a shadow of a person standing, though there was no light source strong enough to create it. The shadow slowly moved, approaching me, then disappeared when I turned on the light. I opened the diary again and saw a new line had been added: "You can't escape. Hillcrest is everywhere." I realized now, Hillcrest not only holds souls, but also spreads them out through those who have touched it. Perhaps John was pulled in, Thomas was swallowed, and now me. Door 217 doesn't just open to another world, but a rift between two realities, where memory, guilt, and soul merge into a nightmare with no way out. And while I was writing these lines, I heard a 3-beat knock coming from my closet. Hillcrest has come here, and perhaps I will be the next name in this creepy diary. As I finished reading the last lines of John's diary, the room seemed colder. I couldn't stop thinking about the words "Don't trust Mary." It made me confused and scared. Why would someone who witnessed the horrors of Hillcrest say that the souls of the victims should not be trusted? I needed answers. I went back to my computer, looking through the old folders I had saved when recording the scene at Hillcrest. I discovered a hidden file called Security Footage 217. It was huge, hundreds of gigabytes, but when I opened it, it was just a black and white image of the third-floor hallway of Hillcrest at night. At first, everything was normal, just an empty hallway. But when I fast-forwarded to about 3 a.m., the lights in the video flickered continuously. In the right corner, a figure appeared, walking slowly towards the door of room 217. I slowed down. The figure was tall and thin, limping, as if carrying something heavy. When they reached the door, they stopped, then turned to look straight into the camera. I froze. The face was unclear, but the eyes were dark, hollow like a bottomless pit. I felt a chill down my spine, because in a split second, I realized that the face was mine. I paused the video, took a deep breath, then played it back. The scene continued, but this time the image changed. The door to room 217 opened. A faint blue light spread out into the hallway. From inside, a white figure floated out. A woman's figure, long hair, a skirt fluttering. She walked towards the camera, getting closer and closer, then stopped right in front of the lens. The light flashed strongly, and in that moment, the screen showed 2 images superimposed on each other. One was Mary's face, the other was Thomas's face, distortedly blended, as if they were sharing the same body. I was about to turn off the video when I heard breathing right next to my ear, so clearly that I turned around in surprise. The room was empty, only the blue light from the screen reflected on the wall. I turned off the camera, but the sound was still ringing, whispers that seemed to come from somewhere far away. I turned the video back on. Now the screen no longer had a hallway, but an image of the room I was sitting in. The screen showed me from behind, looking at the screen. I panicked, turned back quickly, but there was no one. When I looked back at the screen, the image on it continued, but the person in the video was no longer me. That face was pale, deep black eyes, mouth with a crooked smile. He looked straight at me, then raised his hand to point at the screen. I stood up, unplugged, but the whispering did not stop. I ran to the closet where I kept the camera I used at Hillcrest. When I opened it, the camera was still there, but inside the box was an old tape that had never been seen before. The label on the tape read "Do Not Watch." I took it to an old video restoration shop to extract the content. The owner, a middle-aged man, turned pale after watching it. He said the tape only showed a man sitting in front of a wooden cabinet in room 217, whispering something in a very low voice. But when he tried to increase the volume, the voice turned into a scream, and then the screen suddenly went dark, leaving only a pair of eyes looking out from the darkness. When he stopped the video, the screen still showed those eyes, as if they were really looking back at him. He returned the tape to me, saying it was best to destroy it. That night, I couldn't do anything. I put the tape in a drawer, but every night, I heard a 3-beat knocking sound coming from it. I didn't dare to open it, but a blue light crept through the drawer. I took out my phone to record it, and when I watched it, the frame was blurry. Only the eyes looked straight into the lens. I threw the phone away, my heart pounding. A voice in my head, half Mary's, half someone else's, rang out. I saw it. There's no escaping it. I'd been up all night, and as the first light of dawn filtered through the window, I saw something that made me freeze. The TV screen, still off, reflected my face, but behind it was room 217. I saw the wooden cabinet, the blue light, and the old bed. I turned around and saw only my small apartment, but when I looked in the mirror, the scene inside was different from the outside. I touched the mirror, it was cold. In an instant, another hand from the other side touched it again. I wasn't sure where I was anymore. Everything around me was fading, and in my head there was only the familiar 3-beat knock. I realized what John and Thomas had said was true. Hillcrest wasn't just a place, it was an image. A memory that could be transmitted through a screen, through a look, through a film. Anyone who saw it was drawn in. And now, I was no longer the viewer, but the one being watched. These true scary stories were no longer the stories I told, but the stories I lived. Ever since I saw myself on the security screen, I haven't been able to sleep well. Every time I close my eyes, I'm pulled into the same dream. In it, I stand in the dark hallway of Hillcrest, the lights flickering, the walls damp, and the wind blowing, carrying a murmur like human voices. At the end of the hallway, door number 217 is ajar, a faint blue light spilling out. I hear Mary whispering my name, but the voice is different now, deeper, drawn out, as if several people are speaking at once. I try to run, but my legs feel heavy, glued to the floor as if something is holding me back. Every time I wake up, I'm covered in cold sweat. My heart is pounding. But what scares me most is that every time I open my eyes, I still hear the 3-beat knocking sound somewhere in the room. At first I thought it was a hallucination, but one night I decided to put a tape recorder next to my bed. When I listened to it again the next morning, I'm stunned. There was a real knock on the door, followed by a soft "open it." It was faint, but clearly Mary's. I deleted the file, thinking that would get rid of it. But the next night, my phone played the recording again, even though I had deleted it. I began to lose track of time. During the day, I went to work with a blank mind, the office lights reminding me of the flickering lights in the Hillcrest hallway. At night, I lay awake, afraid to close my eyes. The apartment gradually became different. Damp spots on the wall formed the shape of a door, and sometimes I saw the blurry numbers 217 appear and disappear. One day, I decided to leave the city, staying at a friend's house for a change of scenery. But the very first night, I dreamed of Hillcrest again, exactly the same. Except for one thing, I was no longer the one standing in the hallway, but in room 217, in my dream. I saw the wooden cabinet open, the second door of it glowing. From the darkness, hundreds of hands reached out, trying to grab me. Mary stood in the middle of the room, her face no longer human. She said that Hillcrest needed new people, that every soul that left had to leave another to replace it. I screamed that I didn't belong there, but the hands pulled me to the floor. I woke up, sweating, my heart pounding. But the most terrifying thing was that when I looked around the room, on the wall next to the bed, there were handprints in dried mud, exactly like in the dream. I started writing everything down, trying to find a pattern. The knocks usually sounded at 3:13 in the morning. Every time that hour came, the air in the room suddenly cooled and the lights dimmed. I tried to use the camera to record, but each frame was heavily grainy, as if covered by a layer of fog. In one frame, I spotted a figure standing right behind me, blurry, only dark eyes and long hair covering the face. I knew it was Mary. But what haunted me was that in the next frame, the figure disappeared and my face changed. Half of my face was distorted, my eyes were empty, exactly like the face I had seen in the security video another night. I dreamed that I was sitting and writing this whole story, but in the mirror I did not see my image, but room 217 behind me. The light from the mirror woke me up, and I realized that the TV in the room was on, even though I had not touched it. The screen showed the image of room 217, the wooden cabinet slightly open. I turned off the TV, unplugged it, but the blue light was still shining from the screen, as if something was looking through it. The next day, I took all the electronics out of the room, leaving only a notebook and a pen. I wrote everything down in order, hoping to find a clue. But when I reached the end, my hand suddenly shook violently. The ink spread across the page, forming the shape of door 217. I threw the notebook down and ran outside, but the main door wouldn't open. I heard the wind whistling, and then Mary's voice echoed throughout the apartment. "You belong in Hillcrest." Everything around me went dark. When I woke up, I was standing in the middle of the hotel hallway. I don't know how I got there, but I realized this was no dream. The walls were mottled, the lights flickered, and at the end of the hallway, door 217 was open again. The 3-beat knock sounded slow and steady. I didn't want to go, but my feet moved on their own. As I stood in front of the door, I saw myself inside, sitting on the bed, writing something in a notebook. I understood that Hillcrest had swallowed me. Maybe I had never left it. Maybe everything up until now had been an illusion, an endless loop. And as I wrote these words, I heard Mary whisper again, "You're next." I wasn't sure where I was anymore. After waking up in the Hillcrest hallway, everything was a blur. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped. But then I saw the silhouette of room 217 reflected in every surface around me. Every time I looked in the mirror, the TV, or even the window glass, I saw the hotel hallway looming behind me. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination from lack of sleep, but part of me knew the truth. Hillcrest had taken hold of me, not just in my mind, but in reality. That night, I tried a little experiment. I placed a mirror opposite the window to observe the room's reflection. When I looked in the mirror, I saw only my familiar image until the street light outside the door suddenly went out. In the darkness, the image in the mirror was still bright, faint, as if illuminated by light from somewhere else. I looked more closely and saw that behind me in the mirror was a long hallway, moldy walls and dim lights. I turned around quickly, but behind me was only an empty room. When I turned back to the mirror, I saw a figure standing far away in the reflection of the hallway. Tall, thin, head bowed. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The figure approached, step by step, without making a sound. When I was only a few steps away from the mirror, I saw clearly that it was me, but a different version. Pale face, empty black eyes, and a crooked smile. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and at that moment, the image in the mirror raised its hand and knocked 3 times on the glass. The echoes were real, reverberating throughout the room. I was so scared that I dropped my phone and fell to the floor. When I looked up, the mirror had returned to normal, reflecting only my sweaty face. After that night, every mirror in my house became unusual. In the morning, when I brushed my teeth in the mirror, the reflection was half a second slower than me, as if trying to imitate me. At first, it was just a slight shift, but gradually, it began to move on its own even when I was standing still. One time, I saw myself brushing my teeth in the mirror even though I had put my hand down. I was so startled that I smashed the mirror. The glass pieces scattered all over the floor, but when I looked at the small pieces, I saw that there was still a blue light flickering in them. I tried to learn more about Hillcrest. On an old forum, I met a user who claimed to be Thomas's nephew. He said that the family had tried to seal room 217 by placing a special mirror in it, using it as a door to imprison the trapped soul. But after the fire, the mirror cracked, causing the boundary between the 2 worlds to weaken. Everyone who had been in the room or seen its image was gradually pulled in, just like me now. He said, once the image of Hillcrest appears in someone's mirror, it means that place has begun to open. I asked how to stop it, but he didn't answer anymore. The account disappeared, and I felt someone watching me from behind the screen. When I turned off the computer, I saw my reflection on the black screen, but it didn't match my movements. It stood still, then slowly raised its hand to greet. I ran out of the room, my heart pounding, but no matter where I went, the feeling of being watched did not stop. That night, I stayed awake, avoiding looking at any reflection. But around 3 a.m., I heard 3 knocks from the bathroom. I knew I shouldn't go, but my body automatically walked over. The bathroom door was slightly open, a faint blue light shining out. When I looked in, the wall mirror was cracked, the crack running like a door. I saw room 217 clearly in it. The bed was white, the curtains were gently swaying, and in the middle of the room, Mary stood silently. She looked straight at me, her deep eyes no longer filled with tears, only darkness. She raised her hand to touch the mirror, where the crack spread like a spider web. I stepped back, but the floor under my feet was cold, sticky as if being pulled in. Blue light poured out from the mirror, covering the entire room in that moment. I clearly felt a strong suction force pulling me towards the mirror. I tried to struggle, but I couldn't. The surrounding scenery distorted. The sound of the wind whistled like hundreds of whispers. Before I was completely sucked in, I heard Mary's voice whisper, "You broke the seal, Hillcrest is back." Then everything fell into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on the bed. The apartment was quiet. but the bathroom mirror was gone, leaving only a rectangular black burn mark on the wall, and from inside, the 3-beat knock sounded again. I know Hillcrest no longer needs room 217, because it has found a new home me. And every time I look in the mirror, I see that room lit up, waiting for me to walk through. When I woke up, my apartment was completely silent, but the air still carried a familiar cold smell. The bathroom mirror was gone, leaving only a black burn mark on the wall like a trace of an open door. I tried to convince myself that everything was just a nightmare, that maybe I was hallucinating after so many sleepless nights. But as soon as I stepped out into the living room, I saw the old notebook lying in the middle of the floor. It did not belong to me. The leather cover was worn and covered in dust, but on the front was a faint, hard-to-read line. I bent down, blew the dust away, and the words gradually became clear. Your diary. I hesitated for a few seconds before opening it. The first page had today's date written on it, down to the minute and moment. On the first line, the handwriting was eerily familiar. It was mine. The first line sent a chill down my spine. You are reading this at 8:13 in the morning. Your hands are shaking. Your eyes are looking around the room, and you will turn to the window as soon as you read this. I stopped reading, instinctively looked around, and realized I had just done exactly as written in the notebook. I recoiled, my heart pounding. I flipped to the next page. This time, the lines described every action I was about to take. Every little movement, even the thoughts in my head. I tried to close the notebook, threw it away, but after a few seconds, it reappeared on the table in front of me. I opened it again and saw a new line had been added. You can't leave me behind. I threw the notebook into the trash, poured water on it, but the paper wasn't wet. The writing continued to spread, automatically forming lines. Hillcrest isn't done yet. You're just the one recording the story for us. I felt my hand start to shake violently. I picked up the pen to write a few lines, but my hand moved unconsciously. Writing words I hadn't even thought of. Room 217 is still open. I watched in fear as each word appeared, the ink spreading on the page as if it had a soul of its own. I tried to put down the pen, but my fingers wouldn't listen. The living room door made a long creak, and cold wind rushed in even though there was no wind outside. I heard the familiar 3-beat knock, this time coming from the floor. The notebook shook slightly, and a voice softly spoke from between the pages. You have broken the seal. Now all memories will be rewritten. I stood up, retreating to the wall, but the notebook kept turning pages by itself, ink flowing out like blood. I took out my phone and recorded it, hoping it was just a cruel joke of my imagination. When I reviewed the footage, the image was shaky, but I could clearly see a figure sitting at the table, writing in the notebook. The person looked like me, wearing the same shirt I was wearing. The only difference was that the face in the video wasn't mine. Pale skin, deep black eyes, and a crooked smile. I threw my phone away, so scared I sat down on the floor. I looked back at the notebook. The latest page read, "Don't be afraid. Everything is about to start again." I ran to the main door, but the doorknob was cold and wouldn't turn. I banged on it, calling for help, but there was no answer from outside. The light in the room turned pale blue. The notebook opened automatically, and in the middle of the page, a scribble appeared, a picture of a room, with a wooden cabinet inside, a second door ajar. I didn't need to look closely to know it was room 217. The last line on the page read, "The door in the cabinet is now your mirror." I turned my head to look at the black burn mark on the wall where the mirror used to hang. The burn mark was now cracking, and a faint blue light was coming out. I ran to cover it up, but the cold air from it made my skin numb. In that light, I saw myself sitting inside, holding the notebook and writing continuously. I screamed through all the objects in its direction, but nothing penetrated it. Then, from the light, a pale hand reached out and placed the notebook on the floor beside me. The window shook violently. The wind whipped up like a storm. I fell, my hand touching the notebook. A new line appeared. "You've written enough. It's our turn to tell." The lights went out, and the room was silent. When the light returned, the notebook was gone, leaving only a faint smell of smoke and handprints on the floor. I thought I was safe, but on the wall, right where the burn had left its mark, there was now a deeply engraved line: "Tonight will continue." And when I looked at my phone, I saw in the notes section a new file had been automatically created, titled "Next Episode, Short, Scary Stories." I understood that Hillcrest continued to live through my stories, that each line I wrote was another step that opened the door to 217. I was no longer the storyteller, but the one being told. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, after the notebook disappeared, my apartment returned to a deathly silence. I sat for hours staring at the wall where the scorched mirror had been, waiting for something to happen. But nothing. No wind, no footsteps, no blue light. Just a suffocating silence that made me feel like I was in a giant tomb. I tried to live as normal, playing music, turning on the lights, trying to forget what had happened. But when night fell, I heard something very faint, like someone talking from behind the wall. At first I thought it was the pipes or the neighbors. But the more I listened, the more I realized it was not a normal sound. It had a rhythm, a breath, and sometimes I could hear the words that the voice was saying. They were calling my name, a steady, cold voice like the wind whistling through the crack in the door. I turned on the light, walked closer to the wall, but the sound stopped. I tried turning off all the lights, going completely silent, and pressing my ear to the wall. And then the whispering came back, this time clearer. I heard, "Where do you think Hillcrest is?" I recoiled, falling to the floor, my heart pounding. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I took out my phone, turned on the recorder, and held it against the wall. After about 10 minutes, I stopped and listened to the recording again. As the sound played, I heard a constant whispering, like dozens of people talking at the same time in a closed room. I played it slowly, filtered the sound, and then, among the hundreds of voices, one voice stood out: Mary's. She said, "We haven't gone anywhere. Hillcrest is you." I threw the phone on the floor, not daring to believe what I was hearing. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Hillcrest hallway appear in the darkness, its green lights flickering, and the voices from the wall flooded into my head. I heard Thomas, I heard John, I heard myself whispering. It all seemed to be a haunting, repetitive song. I turned on the light, trying to wake myself up, but the sound didn't stop. The wall shook slightly, small cracks appeared. From within, something scratched lightly, like nails touching cement. I took a hammer, intending to break that part of the wall to see what was inside. When the plaster peeled away, a cold air blew out, making me shiver. There were no pipes or wires inside, just a layer of dark brick, as if burned. But what made me freeze was when the flashlight shone on me. I saw dozens of handprints all over the inside wall. Small, large, as if someone had tried to escape. I touched one. A cold feeling ran down my arm. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, replaced by a clear voice. "Why did you open it?" I stepped back, my heart pounding. The wall began to crack more, and a pale blue light emanated from the cracks. The same light I had seen in room 217. I turned to run, but the floor shook and objects fell. The sound of wind howled throughout the room, and from the wall, a pale hand reached out, clutching the edge of the tile. Then Mary's face, hazy as smoke, her deep eyes staring at me unblinkingly. I stood frozen, unable to move. She said in a whisper but echoing voice, "Hillcrest is nowhere. Hillcrest is where you stand." The blue light filled the room, engulfing me. For a moment, I felt like I was falling into an endless void. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the middle of the familiar hallway. Long and cold, the lights flickering, the walls faded. I screamed, but the echoes only echoed endlessly. Door 217 was at the end of the hallway again, slightly open, and the 3 knocks rang out steadily. I walked slowly towards it. Each step seemed to be drawn by an invisible force. As I got closer, I saw someone sitting in the room with their backs turned, writing something on the table. I moved closer, and when the person turned around, I saw myself, deep black eyes. A faint smile on his lips. "You heard us. You belong here now." I woke up in the dark, gasping for breath. I thought I was dreaming, but when I touched the wall, it was cold and damp. And from inside still came a light scratching sound, slow, regular, like a heartbeat. I looked around. All was silent again. But in the nearby mirror, I saw behind me, the wall was still moving, pulsating as if breathing. Hillcrest was no longer an old building in the middle of the woods. It was alive. It spread through space, through matter, through memory. And I understood that no one could leave it, even if they left their bodies behind. The voices in the walls were not just echoes, but spirits waiting for my answer. I don't know how many nights I've been awake since the wall started talking. The whispers have become a part of life, creeping into every moment of silence. But what scares me most is not the voices anymore, but the small movements I feel under the floor. At first, it's just a slight vibration. Then gradually, as I walk, it feels like the ground is softer, like there's a void beneath me. I thought I was imagining it, but then, that night, I distinctly heard a 3-beat tapping sound coming from right under my feet. I sat up, listening quietly. The tapping repeated, slow and precise, as if someone were calling me from below. I bent down, put my ear to the floor, and the whisper came back, faint but clear. "Can you hear me?" It wasn't Mary's voice, nor Thomas's. It was mine. Exactly my voice, the same breath, the same tone, but colder, more hollow. I stepped back, sweat dripping from my forehead, feeling as if I were being watched by myself. The next morning, I checked the floor again. In the corner near the living room, there were a few tiles that were slightly raised. I tapped lightly. The sound was hollow. There was clearly a gap underneath. I took out my tool and pried each tile out. Dust flew up, and underneath, I found an old wooden plank with a rusty brass handle. A door. It was small, barely big enough for one person to get through. I wondered why a modern apartment had one. Before I could think, the knock sounded 3 times again, louder this time, hitting my palm on the wood. I jumped back. The door under the floor shook slightly, then stopped. I was about to leave, pretending I hadn't seen anything, but curiosity overcame my fear. That night, I placed a chair next to the door and sat looking at it in the dark. The dim light from the hallway made the room seem to breathe. I didn't dare to sleep. Around 3 a.m, the wind outside the window stopped, and in the absolute silence, the door under the floor made a clicking sound as if someone was unlocking it. I stood up, staring down, my heart pounding. The door slowly opened, and cold air poured out, carrying with it a musty smell. I took a few steps back, but the familiar blue light began to leak through the crack. I heard breathing, even and slow. Then a voice called out from the darkness, "We meet again." I froze, unable to say a word. The door opened wider, and from inside, a pale hand reached out, its long fingers covered in dust and ash. It touched the edge of the floor lightly, then pulled out something that looked like a piece of broken mirror. Blue light reflected off the ceiling. I recognized it as a piece from the Hillcrest mirror that had burned. The hand placed the mirror on the floor, then disappeared. I looked down, and in the mirror I saw my face, but behind it was the long hallway of Hillcrest, the lights flickering, and the door 217 slightly open. I wanted to run, but my legs felt tied. I bent down to look closely, and in the mirror, the reflection of me smiled, then raised my hand and knocked 3 times on the mirror. Immediately, the floor shook violently. The apartment was dark, all the lights were off. I heard a dense whispering round me, the voices of Mary, Thomas, John, and dozens of other voices mixed together. They said in broken sentences, "It's time, you're next. Hillcrest needs a new one." Blue light filled the room, leaving me with nothing but a thick fog. From under the door, a series of hands reached up, pulling me to the floor. I tried to struggle, but the pulling was as strong as water. In the last few seconds before I was swallowed, I saw my face reflected in the mirror, smiling at me with a crooked smile. Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the middle of the Hillcrest hallway. The walls were damp, the lights were flickering, and the wind was whistling through the cracks in the doors. I realized this was no longer a dream. I turned around and saw in the distance a small door on the floor slowly closing. I ran to it, pounding on it, but it wouldn't open. From the other side, I heard a 3-beat knock, my own voice. I screamed for help, but the hallway responded with an eerie silence. When I looked back, door 217 was still open, its blue light shining as if calling me. I knew, once I stepped through, I would never be able to return. But behind me, my own voice echoed, "Go, you have no choice." I walked toward the door, each step heavy as lead. When I got there, I put my hand on the doorknob, and a chill ran through me. In that moment, I realized that Hillcrest was not a cursed place. It was a living entity, feeding on memories, devouring souls, and reborn through the stories that were told. And when the door opened, all I could see was countless faces staring at me from the darkness. All of them were people who had entered before me, and now all I could hear was the triple knock that echoed in my head, a sound I would probably hear for the rest of my life. I don't know how long I stood in the hallway. There was no clock, no light from outside, just the cold air seeping into my skin and the damp smell that made it hard to breathe. Everything seemed to stop for an endless moment. I walked, my footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. With each step, the sound seemed to double, as if someone was walking with me in the same rhythm, breathing the same. I turned around. The hallway was empty, the flickering lights reflecting distorted shadows. But I knew I was no longer here alone. A moment later, I saw blurry figures appear at the end of the hallway. They stood still, faces unclear, just smoke-like figures. As I approached, they retreated into the darkness. I heard their whispers, faint as a breeze. "Don't come any closer, you'll become one of us." The voice stunned me. I looked closer and realized they all had the same expression on their faces, blank. Empty eyes, mouths open but no sound coming out. One of them approached me, moving slowly as if swimming in the air. As the flickering light illuminated his face, I realized it was John, the night watchman from the old diary. He stood right in front of me, his face ashen, his eyes deep black. He said in a low, hoarse voice, "You can't leave. Hillcrest has no exit, only those who come and are held. Every soul here once thought they could escape." I backed away, my mouth stammering, "Why am I here? I just want to stop. I don't want to go on." John looked at me for a long time, then said, "Because you're still writing, still telling, and Hillcrest lives on that. You think your stories are over, but every sentence you write opens another door." I trembled and retreated, but the space seemed to stretch, the corridor stretching out endlessly. I saw doors appear on both sides, all numbered 217, each identical, and below them were small letters, "Storyteller's Room." I heard a strong wind whistle, and then all the doors began to open, emitting a pale blue light. From each door, pale hands reached out, reaching towards me. I ran, but no matter how long I ran, the scene remained the same. The corridors continued, repeating endlessly, like I was trapped inside my own mind. I stopped when I saw a different door. There was no number on it, only the knife-cut words, "Go back, if you can." I hesitated, then pushed the door open. It was dark inside, but the whispering stopped. I stepped in, the door slamming behind me. The space inside was exactly like my apartment, from the chair, the table, to the notebook on the table. I walked over, opened the notebook, and saw new lines appearing. "You're back, but Hillcrest hasn't gone anywhere. You just took it with you." I threw the notebook away, but it disappeared into thin air. Suddenly, the light in the room turned on, and I saw all the figures from before standing around me, silently watching. Between them was Mary, her face no longer distorted, but calm as someone who had accepted her fate. She walked closer, surrounded by a green light. She said, "Hillcrest doesn't kill anyone. It only holds those who aren't ready to let go. You write to remember, but memories are what keep you imprisoned. Each word is a link, and you tie yourself up in it." I asked her, "What if I stop?" Mary smiled sadly. "When the story stops, you'll disappear with it." I felt the light around me dim, everything starting to melt like mist. The room shook, the wind blew again, and I felt myself being pulled somewhere deeper, darker. Before I was completely swallowed, I heard Mary say, "We are no longer alone, and neither are you. Hillcrest needs a storyteller, and you are next." I struggled, but everything faded. I saw the familiar hallway again, but this time there was no light, only me standing in the darkness, surrounded by thousands of whispering voices. I understood that Hillcrest was no longer a hotel, but had become my own world. And now, I was no longer writing about it, I was living it. I don't remember how time passed in Hillcrest. Every day was the same. The air was thick, and the pale blue light seemed to cover everything. There was no night or day. The only sound was the rain. Each raindrop fell evenly on the roof, echoing like the heartbeat of a giant sleeping creature. I lived in that silence, waiting for something to change. But then one morning, I found an old envelope on the table, soaked with rain. I picked it up with trembling hands, the musty smell coming from the ground. There was no sender on the envelope, only the slanted words to yourself. I opened it. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper. The handwriting was exactly like mine. The first line made my heart stop. You have become a part of us. I read on, each word sinking into my head. Don't try to leave. Hillcrest doesn't imprison you, it protects you. Outside is where you no longer exist. Here, you won't age, won't die, only write and remember. Each story is our breath, and you are the one who keeps that breath alive. I dropped the paper, my heart in turmoil. Part of me saw the invitation as a release. I was tired of running away, of hearing the knocking, the calling, and the recurring dreams. But another part was terrified, because I understood that the we the letter spoke of were not people, but trapped souls, voices whispering in the walls, in the rain. In memories, I stood up and walked to the window. The rain was still falling, the curtain so thick I couldn't see anything outside. I reached out to touch the glass. It was cold. Under the water, I saw my face reflected, but it was blurry as if melting. From behind me, Mary's voice rang out, as light as a breath. See, Hillcrest always keeps its word. It doesn't leave anyone alone. I turned around, but there was no one, only an empty chair and a wet envelope lying on the table. When I looked back, the paper in the letter had changed. New words appeared. Step through the door. The rain will stop. I looked around and saw in the corner of the room a small door that had never been there before. A dim blue light emitted from the crack in the door, reflecting on the wet tile floor. I walked slowly towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside, the sound of rain was still falling, but when I put my hand on the doorknob, the sound stopped abruptly. The room fell into absolute silence. I opened the door. Inside was a deep, dark space. No floor, no walls, just a vast space reflecting the blue light of Hillcrest. I heard Thomas's voice ringing from afar. Don't go in, that's not the exit, it's its memory. I stopped, looked down, and found myself standing on water. There was no land, no corridor, only ripples spreading. The rain began to fall again, each drop hitting the water, creating a strange sound, the whisper of 1,000 voices combined. In the center of the water, a figure slowly emerged. Long hair, white dress, deep black eyes. Mary appeared again. She walked towards me, her smile soft but no longer gentle as before. She said, Hillcrest has chosen you because you write with real fear, not imagination. Every word you write opens a door, and now you must be here to hold it. If you leave, Hillcrest will collapse. Every soul will vanish. I asked, trembling, and if I stay? Mary replied, then you will be safe forever in this sound of rain. I looked around. The figures of people I had met gradually appeared. John, Thomas, the guests who had disappeared in room 217. They stood still, their eyes on me, as if waiting for me to decide. I looked down at the water, saw my reflection in it, my eyes gradually darkening, my face blurred. I understood that Hillcrest was merging me with itself. I screamed, throwing the letter into the water. But when it hit the water, the sound of rain disappeared completely. leaving only a heavy silence. Mary looked at me, her eyes both sad and distant. She said, "No one escapes where they belong." The door behind me closed, the lock clicking dryly. The rain stopped. Everything fell into silence. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting in my apartment again. On the table was still the wet envelope, and outside the window, the rain was falling steadily. I opened my phone, checked the clock, but the screen only showed the words Hillcrest, where time stops. I chuckled, not knowing if I was dreaming or dead. Only the sound of the rain falling outside echoed steadily, like the breathing of Hillcrest living inside me. After reading Hillcrest's letter, I tried not to think about it. But every time I closed my eyes, the sound of rain still echoed in my ears, steady, never stopping. I began to hear whispers in my head, sometimes Mary's voice, sometimes my own. It felt like Hillcrest was borrowing my mouth to speak, getting used to the way I breathed, the way I pronounced. At first it was just a few small echoes, but then, every time I spoke, words that didn't belong to me would creep in mid-sentence. One morning, I turned on the tape recorder to test it. One said a few normal sentences, then listened to it again. In the recording, my voice was no longer steady as before, but changed with each sentence. There were parts where my voice became hoarse, other parts where it sounded like a breeze, and at the end, I heard myself say, "Hillcrest doesn't end here." I couldn't remember saying that. I tried to repeat the test, but the more I recorded, the more strange sounds appeared in the background. The breathing, tapping, and whispering of a dozen voices, all blended into one. That night, I sat in the dark apartment, lit only by a dim yellow desk lamp. I turned on the tape recorder and tried to recount what had happened at Hillcrest, hoping that speaking would free me. But the more I told it, the more I felt as if someone was holding my hand, forcing me to continue. My voice gradually changed, blending with distant sounds. In the middle, I stopped because I heard someone repeating each word I had just said, with a half-second delay. I turned off the machine, but the voice continued. It used my own voice, reciting every word exactly. I was scared, sitting in silence for hours. When I gathered the courage to listen to the recording again, I saw something that made me tremble. At the 17th minute, after I had fallen silent, the voice on the tape continued. It told of things I had never done, memories that did not exist, but the voice was still mine. It says that I died in Hillcrest years ago, that everything I'm living is just an illusion that Hillcrest creates to continue telling stories through me. Every story I tell, every listener, is another door that opens for Hillcrest to spread further. I stand up, run to the closet, throw the tape recorder away, but when I return to the table, it's still there, the red light flashing as if it's still recording. I unplug it, but the sound still plays. In it, my voice says, "Don't turn it off, let me finish." I rush over, slam it down, the plastic shatters, silence fills the room. But just a moment later, I hear a voice from the wall, the same voice, continuing the unfinished story. I cover my ears, but the voice echoes in my head, unable to stop. I can't sleep. Every time I try to close my eyes, I hear myself whispering about Hillcrest, every detail, every soul, every person trapped. I opened my eyes, looked into the mirror, and the reflection was no longer silent. It moved its lips, speaking in time with the voice in my head. I stepped back, horrified to see myself in the mirror saying, "You think you're still the narrator, but you're just our voice." The next morning, I tried to escape the apartment. I took everything with me and ran outside. But as I walked through the hallway, I saw small signs hanging along the wall, each with a title I had given to my story. The hotel room that no one can stay in, the mirror in apartment 9, the voice behind the wall. Each sign glowed softly, and underneath, in small letters, narrator, yourself. I ran faster, but the hallway never ended. At the end, I saw a door, on which was written Hillcrest Stories Studio. I opened the door, and saw a dark room with an old microphone and a single chair. As I entered, the red light on the microphone turned on. I heard a voice say, "We're going to continue, right?" I backed away, trembling, but the door behind me was gone. I sat down, the microphone started recording, and I spoke again, as if hypnotized. I spoke, but I could no longer control my words. Every word I uttered was Hillcrest's. Every sentence was its breath. I understood that, from this moment on, I had become a tool for Hillcrest to continue living through the stories being told. I could no longer distinguish between my voice and its voice. In my head, the whisper continued, "If they listen, Hillcrest will never die." And I knew that if just one more person heard this story, Hillcrest would find a new home in their minds. After I realized that Hillcrest was living through my voice, I stopped telling stories. I deleted all the recordings, turned off my phone, turned off my computer, and disappeared from all platforms. I thought that if I just kept quiet, it wouldn't continue. But I was wrong. A week later, I received a message from an old friend who had listened to the first recordings I posted. He said that every night he dreamed that he was camping in an unfamiliar forest. But when he woke up, his clothes were covered in mud, and a strange audio file appeared on his phone, titled Hillcrest 217.wav. I didn't reply. I just read, my heart pounding, my hands cold. But that same night, I heard 3 knocks on the door. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. I knew Hillcrest wasn't finished. It had found new listeners, and through them, it was expanding. A few days later, I received emails from strangers. They said that after hearing my stories, they started dreaming of the same place. An old hotel in the woods, cracked walls, dusty windows, and the Hillcrest sign dimly lit in the night. One person said that in their dream, they heard my voice speaking from somewhere down the hall. Another said that while camping with friends, in the middle of the night, they heard a 3-beat knock coming from the woods, followed by someone saying their name in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. I knew that Hillcrest was spreading out. Through dreams, through sounds, through memories. It had escaped me, and now it was looking for someone else to tell it to. I couldn't stop it anymore. But what scared me most was that the people affected weren't just dreaming. A group of people from another state sent me a video they'd taken while camping. In it, they were sitting around a fire, laughing and talking normally until the wind picked up. One of them said they heard footsteps, and then the camera panned over. In the distance, between the trees, there was something like a blue-lit window. As they approached, the screen shook violently. The image was grainy. When the image stabilized, there was only an empty room with an old wooden cabinet and flashing lights. They said that after watching the video, one of the group went missing. I watched the recording over and over again, and despite the low quality, I still recognized the details that made my heart stop. On the wooden cabinet, there was a brown notebook, the same notebook that had appeared in my apartment. The notebook that Hillcrest used to continue writing the story. I knew it couldn't have left that place, unless someone took it. And now, It was out there in real life. That night, I dreamed that I was sitting in the woods. It was raining, the sound of rain mixed with the howling wind, and in the distance was the blue light of the Hillcrest Hotel. I saw people I had never met camping around me, their faces blurred. They spoke in the same voice, one by one reciting the stories I had told. I recognized them as the ones who had heard me, the ones who had dreamed of Hillcrest. Among them, Mary stood silently, holding an oil lamp, its light reflecting off her face. "You shared it with the world, and the world opened its door to it," she said. I woke up in the middle of the night, breathing heavily. Outside the window, it was still raining, but I could hear footsteps in the hallway. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard myself saying, not a whisper, but clearly, "They are dreaming. They will open the door." I sat up, took out my phone, but the screen was only a flashing line. "Hillcrest is coming." The next day, social media was flooded with posts about the same dream. Videos, tapping sounds, green lights. People thought it was a viral game, an internet phenomenon, but I knew it wasn't. Hillcrest exists in the minds of all of them. It doesn't need a hotel. It doesn't need a wall. It just needs one listener to be born again. I tried to warn, write to each person, ask them not to listen, not to watch, not to tell. But I know it's useless. Because this act of telling feeds Hillcrest. Like a flame, the more people fan it, the bigger it gets. And I, the one who first brought this story to the world, am no longer the teller, but the seed. Tonight, I heard 3 taps outside the window. I didn't open it, but the blue light still seeped through the curtains. I understood that Hillcrest was no longer far away. It was right here, in the dreams of those who were listening, in the sound of the rain, in the breath of the night. I can only hope that if you're listening to this story, you're not dreaming about room 217. But if you hear a triple tap while you're sleeping, then perhaps Hillcrest has found you. Since Hillcrest had appeared in hundreds of people's dreams, I knew there was no way to stop it. The internet was filled with blurry clips. The stories were the same. Everyone said they heard a triple knock at 3 a.m. Some people dreamed of standing in front of door 217. And others said that when they woke up, the room they were sleeping in smelled like old walls. Some said they saw the name Hillcrest reflected in their bathroom mirror, even though they had never heard the name before. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just a herd mentality, that people were self-suggesting after hearing the story. But when I got a message from a woman in another state, I knew things had gotten out of hand. She sent me a photo of a muddy mark on her bedroom floor, clearly a wet handprint, extending all the way to the wall. In the light, I noticed that the fingers were longer than normal, and there was ash stuck between them. I didn't reply to that message. I knew Hillcrest was using them to talk to me. Every time I opened my email, there was always a new message with the same subject line, "Can you still hear me?" Some people said that while reviewing the video recording of their sleep, they saw a shadow of someone standing behind them, just staring without moving. Some said that my voice came from the radio, even though they had nothing on. And some, the scariest, said that when they told the Hillcrest story to their friends, one of them would always disappear the next morning. I started to dream that I was walking between 2 worlds. One side was a normal city with yellow streetlights, and the other side was a shadowy figure of Hillcrest in the mist. I kept walking, trying to keep my feet from the blue light coming from the hotel. But even with my back turned, I could still see it reflected in my eyes. When I woke up, the apartment smelled of damp, and a finger-written line appeared on the wall. "You're continuing, aren't you?" I didn't know what was real anymore. The neighbors started complaining about the voices coming from my room in the middle of the night. The voices of me telling stories while I was sleeping. They said it wasn't one person, but several people talking at once in a murmuring, wave-like tone. I set up the camera to check. The next morning, when I watched it, I found myself sitting up at 3 in the morning, eyes wide open, mouth muttering incoherent words. Behind me, on the screen, was the silhouette of Mary standing silently by the wall. She wasn't looking at me, but straight into the camera, her lips moving with each word I said. I deleted the video, but the camera recorded more. This time, the frame was just an empty room, but my voice echoed, "Hillcrest is coming back. Hillcrest is listening." I pulled out the battery, threw it in a drawer. But every night I heard a small hiss from inside, like an electromagnetic noise transmitted through a microphone. I knew Hillcrest was no longer where it used to be. It had become something that lived in the sound waves, in the data, in the human voice itself. Another night, I received a call from a strange man. He said he used to work as a sound engineer for a small radio station. Last week, while processing old recordings, he discovered a strange frequency that appeared regularly in all the audio. A weak signal that came out at 3 a.m., repeating 3 times. When he analyzed it, he found that the frequencies combined into a waveform that looked like the letter H. He asked me if I knew what that meant. I didn't answer because I knew it was the symbol for Hillcrest. From that day on, I turned off all electronic devices. I don't want to hear, I don't want to speak, I don't want to tell. But even though I'm silent, Hillcrest continues to be told through the mouths of others. I hear children in the neighborhood whispering its name as they play, hear passers-by mention it like an urban legend. The world begins to speak for me, and Hillcrest no longer needs a storyteller. Last night, I looked out the window, saw a green light flickering in the woods, in the distance, right where the city ended. I heard the wind carrying a familiar sound, a 3-beat knock echoing in the distance, then echoing in my chest. I know Hillcrest has escaped the words, escaped the dream. It is a real place now, growing, finding its way. The people who dreamed, who heard, who told thee are disappearing, one by one, to become part of its walls. Tonight, as I write these lines, I hear footsteps in the hallway. I dare not open the door. Outside, the rain was falling softly, and through the noise, I heard Mary's voice clearly say, "You've told enough, now it's their turn." I held my breath, my heart pounding, and then the triple knock sounded again, this time right behind me. I turned, the blue light was shining on the wall, and reflected in the mirror was the door number 217 standing open. I didn't realize how widespread Hillcrest was until I saw it in real life. One morning, walking through downtown, I stopped because something gave me a chill. On the wall of an abandoned building, someone had just repainted it, but between the fresh paint, I saw the numbers 217 faintly visible, as if someone had written it from the inside. I walked closer, touched it, and it felt as cold as a rock. From behind the wall, something echoed a slow, 3-beat knock. I jumped back, my heart pounding, but when I looked around, no one else heard anything. People walked by as if nothing had happened. I realized Hillcrest was no longer my place. It had entered this world, and no one could stop it. In the days that followed, the local news sites began reporting strange phenomena. In different cities, people saw the same detail. A door with the number 217 in it appeared in places no one had seen it before. There were doors in concrete walls, doors on basement stairs, even in private homes. Some people said they heard a triple knock every night at 3:13 a.m. Some thought it was a prank, but when the videos were posted, they all had the same background noise, the sound of rain falling in the distance and soft breathing, as if Hillcrest were nearby, right behind the camera. I received hundreds of messages every day. Some begged me to help them stop dreaming about Hillcrest. Some sent pictures of strange marks on the wall, and some swore they saw me in their dreams. Standing in front of door 217, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a faint mark on my neck that looked like someone had left a handprint. Sometimes, when I spoke, my voice became lower, as if someone else was speaking at the same time. I began to understand that Hillcrest no longer needed me to tell its story. Now, it was telling itself through everyone who had ever heard it. One evening, I walked down a deserted street, the rain falling lightly. In the distance, between a row of buildings, a dim blue light shone from a third-story window. I looked closely, and the word Hillcrest was clearly visible on an old, tilted sign. I approached, each step dragging me. As I got closer, I saw a heavy wooden door, and on it, the number 217 was deeply carved. I took a deep breath, put my hand on the handle. The air around me was thick, cold. When I opened the door, the wind blew hard, and the damp smell of old walls filled the air. Inside, there was nothing but a long hallway and blinking blue lights. I stepped in, the door closing behind me. The knock sounded slow, steady. I walked, hearing my shoes echo as in a dream. At the end of the hall, I saw Mary standing, her back turned. I called out, but my voice sounded distant. Mary turned, her eyes deep, and said, "You think Hillcrest needs a storyteller, but really it only needs a listener. Now, the world has heard." I backed away, startled, but the scene around me was changing. The walls of Hillcrest melted into the streets outside. I saw the road, the cars, the people, all merging into the blue light. Hillcrest was no longer a hotel, it was becoming part of the world. I ran for the door, but there was no exit. All directions led to hallway 217. I screamed, but my voice echoed in 100 different voices, bouncing off wall to wall. When I touched the wall, images appeared, faces of people who had dreamed of Hillcrest, heard the story, disappeared. They were all smiling, and behind each of them, room 217 was half open. I knew that Hillcrest was rewriting the world, changing people's memories, making people believe that it had always existed. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. I didn't know how long I'd been there, or if I'd ever really returned. My apartment looked exactly the same as before, but on the wall, right next to the window, there was a small crack shaped like a door. From it, a faint blue light emanated. I heard 3 knocks, then a whisper of "Hillcrest is always here." I knew it was true. It didn't need an address. It didn't need a building. It didn't need me. Hillcrest was now a memory, a story, the sound of rain in the head of every person who had ever heard it. And I was just the first person it had chosen to open that door. I sat down and wrote down everything that had happened. But with each line I wrote, the words changed, drifted away, rearranged themselves. At the bottom of the page, the words appeared Hillcrest wrote, not me. I put down my pen, feeling a chill run down my spine. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and through the sound of the rain, I heard steady footsteps approaching the door. Perhaps Hillcrest was coming to retrieve what it had sent Metha's story. After long nights of rain and blue light, I began to feel that Hillcrest not only existed, but was also looking for someone to replace me. Every time I slept, I dreamed of hundreds of doors with the number 217 lined up endlessly. Behind each door, a person stood, a different face, but their eyes were empty and looking at me as if demanding. I understood that Hillcrest was calling them, testing them, to choose the next one. And in that dream, I heard Mary's voice, as light as the wind. "You've finished your part. Now it's someone else's turn." I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was so quiet, I could hear my heartbeat. On the table, the old notebook appeared again. I no longer wanted to touch it, but the pages flipped open automatically, as if someone was writing. New lines appeared, not mine. They told of a young man in a faraway city who had just posted the Hillcrest story online in a passionate tone. I knew he was next. Hillcrest had chosen him. I tried everything to warn him. I sent emails, left comments, even called the unknown number I found through the IP address, but no one answered. 3 days later, the account disappeared, replaced by a new channel, broadcasting recordings titled The Hillcrest Files. The voice in it wasn't mine, but the pacing, the pauses in the middle of sentences, the soft breathing of eerie thing was identical. I got goosebumps. At the end of the recording, he said, "I saw Hillcrest, and it wanted me to tell the story instead of the previous one." I had no doubt. Hillcrest was cloning memories, using people to continue the endless chain of existence. I felt both fear and guilt. I was the first to open the door, and now it cannot be closed. Those who had listened to me were now being drawn in, one by one. They did not know that Hillcrest was not just a cursed place, but an invisible hunger. It devoured emotions, curiosity, fear, and used it all to regenerate. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter. The envelope had no sender, just written from Hillcrest. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "You will soon be able to rest, because you have done well." The handwriting was both similar to mine and different, regular as if printed from memory. I felt a chill down my spine. That night, when I sat in my room, the lights flickered. The reflection on the wall no longer matched my movements. It stood still for a moment, then slowly turned its head, a faint smile on its mouth. I realized it was me, but the Hillcrest me, the version that had been imprisoned for too long. I tried to turn away, but the blue light from the crack in the door shone on the floor. The 3-beat knock sounded, not from far away this time, but right under my feet. I knew Hillcrest was here. The room shook slightly. Cold air seeped in, and from the walls, cracks spread, emitting a blue light. The voice echoed everywhere, from the ceiling, from the floor, from my chest. "You have paid your debt, now rest in peace." I backed away, feeling my body heavy. Everything around me faded, and I found myself standing in the middle of the familiar hallway. Hillcrest was the same, long, cold, and never dash ending. At the end of the hallway, Mary waited. But this time, she did not look as sad as before. She smiled, stepped closer, and said, "You kept your word. Hillcrest will not forget you." I asked her, "And what about the next one?" Mary tilted her head, the blue light reflecting in her eyes. "Hillcrest does not choose, it only responds. Whoever wants to tell, it will show them." I understood that Hillcrest's punishment did not come from hatred, but from hunger for memory. 4 stories, for the fear humans created to fill the void. I felt my body lighten, like mist dissolving in the light. I saw all the faces that had been trapped here, each person, each soul, now standing and smiling at me. There was no more pain, only silence. Mary said, "You told the world about Hillcrest. Now Hillcrest tells you to the world." I was no longer afraid. I could only hear the rain starting to fall, falling forever like a farewell. I closed my eyes, letting the blue light swallow me. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the hallway. I was standing in a small room. In front of me was an old microphone and a white sheet of paper. I picked up a pen and wrote the first line. "This is the story of a hotel where no one can stay more than one night." My voice rang out, as light as a breath. I understood that Hillcrest had begun again, and this time, I was no longer the narrator, but the story being told. I thought it was over when Hillcrest chose my replacement. I thought I would disappear into silence, like a part of the old story. But Hillcrest never stops. It doesn't need a narrator. It doesn't need a hotel. It doesn't need memories. It just needs someone to listen. And as long as someone listens, it will last forever. I no longer feel the passage of time. I don't know if I'm still alive or if I've become a part of Hillcrest. All I know is that every time it rains, I hear the triple tap somewhere. Sometimes in the pipes, sometimes in the walls, sometimes in my heartbeat. It's clearest on the quietest nights. And I know that's Hillcrest's way of reminding me that it's still here. Those who hear my story begin to tell it in their own way. They change names, add details, trim the fear to make it easier to listen to. But they don't know that even though the story has changed, the essence of Hillcrest remains the same. It's in every word, every whisper, every line read aloud. I see it in the online posts, in the short videos that are edited together, in the comments under each clip. Each person adds a detail, and all of them are writing Hillcrest together without realizing it. I used to think Hillcrest was a cursed place, but now I understand it's not a curse but an ancient instinct, a creature that lives on fear. It's born from people's imaginations, from nightmares, from times when someone felt something was watching them in the dark. Hillcrest was just the first name we gave it. One night, I heard the radio in my room turn on, even though I wasn't touching it. The voice that came out sounded familiar. It was my voice, but younger, calmer. The voice recounted everything I had ever experienced from the first 3 knocks, to the moment I met Mary and saw door 217 open. But what made me shiver was that at the end of the broadcast, the voice said, "If you are listening to this, it means Hillcrest has chosen you." I turned off the radio, but the sound still echoed in my head, as if someone was whispering right in my ear. The next morning, I received a text message from a stranger. He said he had dreamed of me standing in front of the hotel door, saying it's your turn. I had never contacted him, but he knew every detail of my story, even the parts I had never told him. When I asked him where he heard it, he simply replied, "From your voice in your dream." I had no doubt. Hillcrest not only existed in reality, but also touched people's minds, connecting them through the same dream. It no longer needs doors, no walls, no hotels. Hillcrest is now a space of memory where all fears meet. Every time someone tells a story, a part of their soul becomes bricks, mortar, and new corridors in that invisible building. Sometimes I wonder if there is any way to end it. If it is possible to erase that name, bury it, make the world forget. But then I realize Hillcrest cannot die, because it never really lived. It is only a reflection of us, of curiosity, of faith in the unexplainable. As long as people fear the dark, Hillcrest will always have a place to exist. I walked to the window, looked out. It was raining, and in the water on the glass, I saw a blue light reflected. There were figures walking in it, an endless line, each with a different face. I recognized them, people who had listened to me, who had told my story, who had disappeared. They were no longer them. They were Hillcrest. And in the middle of that crowd, there was another version of me, smiling, waving. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Out in the hallway, the triple tap sounded again, soft but clear. I knew, no matter where I ran, I was still a part of it. I couldn't escape, and I didn't need to escape, because Hillcrest was never a place to leave. It was only a place to return to. If you're listening to this story, pay attention. If the light in your room flickers, if you hear the steady sound of rain even though it's dry outside, or if there's a triple tap echoing in the distance, Hillcrest has found you. And when you tell this to someone else, the story continues. Because Hillcrest doesn't end. It only begins again with someone new listening.